Mm-hmm. Next, we have Whitney White. Whitney White has her bachelor's degree in criminal justice and is a D&I project manager for an organization called Talent 2025. I learned that Talent 2025 is a nonprofit organization who has over 100 CEOs who work to ensure our talent in West Michigan is the best in the country. They advocate for those without a voice and strive to make West Michigan the best place to live and work on. Thank you so much for being here today, Whitney.
Thank you for the introduction, Ayana. Good morning, everyone who's joining via Facebook and then also Zoom. Everything I share today will be a reflection of my own personal views and experience and not a reflection of my company. Today, I'll talk about racism from two different aspects. One of them is interpersonal racism, which occurs between individuals, and the second is institutional racism, which is pretty much discriminatory treatment, unfair policies and practices, and inequitable opportunities based on race. And I'm also going to focus on the workplace and what it's like to be a Black woman in corporate America. So some background on me to get us started. I am from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was born and raised on the southeast side of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I still reside here. So if you are familiar with any of the work that Kellogg is doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, my neighborhood, the 49507 zip code, is considered to be a neighborhood of focus. So very high unemployment rates, poor performing schools, low educational attainment. There's a large number of returning citizens who come here after they serve time in jail and or prison, very low median household incomes, and high crime rates. Almost every time a person is murdered in Grand Rapids, they reference the southeast side of Grand Rapids. So that's where I came from and where I still live. I attended Grand Valley State University. I do have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I was really one of the few people of color in my class, especially in the Allendale campus. And at Grand Valley is where I would say I first experienced racism. So I had a really positive experience, but others that I'm very close to had things happen like the N-word was written on their dorm room door. There were acts of hate crime, both on campus and off campus. And then there were other instances where white students didn't want a room with Black students. So that was where racism kind of first appeared in my life, I would say. In my current job, I work as a diversity and inclusion project manager for Talent 2025. So I work directly with CEOs, human resource leaders, diversity officers from over 100 companies, and I lead multiple regional diversity and inclusion initiatives. Our whole goal is to help employers attract and retain more diverse talent. So with that being said, when you think of CEO, you probably think of a white man, and that generally is the case. There's a very small percentage of women, and then also an even smaller percentage of people of color. So let's talk about current events. So over the last few months, I feel like the unjust killings of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and others, countless others, have brought to light that the systemic racism that both African American and other marginalized communities face is very real. Communities of color are deeply impacted by this inequity. And as a result, if you are, currently reporting to work or if you're employed right now, you'll notice that many employees of color, especially, are very emotional, we're stressed, we're disengaged, feel the need to cover more than normal, right? So we're not as happy at work, we're not as motivated, things like that. So now that leads me to talk about what it's like to be Black in corporate America. The Harvard Business Review wrote an article called Toward a Racially Just Workplace, and they highlighted a bunch of things that actually resonated well with me, and I want to share with you today. So, compared to the white peers, African Americans with the same credentials are less likely to be hired, developed, and promoted, and our lived experience is noticeably worse. So African Americans face many types of racism: aversive racism, modern racism, interpersonal, systemic racism, and then we also deal with a lot of microaggressions. One thing that happens to me often is that I'll be in a meeting with peers and colleagues, and I'll suggest an idea, and my idea may not be acknowledged or may be dismissed. But then there could be another person, a white person of color, a white person, or a white man who says the exact same thing that I say 5 minutes later, 20 minutes later, and then the whole mood is different. Everybody praises the idea, and they're like, "That's great. Let's act on that right away." It's like, I said that 5 minutes ago. You didn't hear me when I said it? So microaggressions, things that happen in the workplace where people kind of devalue people of color, and it happens to women a lot often as well. Black people have to prove greater competence before being considered for or awarded promotions. So Black people may have to go through an interview, do a presentation, provide references, and things like that, where white people are promoted simply because another white person vouched for them. That happens often both with getting jobs and then also promoted. And I feel like that's part of the reason why Blacks are also overly represented in very entry-level positions, because it's hard for us to move up even when we are within a company. Black workers feel the need to conform, suppress their personal attributes, and then also do other things to kind of shrink themselves or minimize themselves to conform with the white majority in organizations. So I've been guilty of this as well as a Black woman. When I first started in corporate America, I always felt the need to change my hair in the sense that I would straighten my hair because I thought that that was more acceptable. According to the internet, this is more professional. So I wouldn't really wear natural hairstyles or colored hair and things like that. Even though as a Black woman, I enjoy changing my hair, but that's just one of the ways that I felt the need to conform to, fit in with the majority culture. I'm also a very expressive person by nature. So sometimes I'm loud, I talk with my hands, I show a lot of emotions at work. In corporate America, I tune all of that down, because if you're too passionate about something, too loud about something, you could be perceived as too emotional, emotionally unstable, or like the angry Black woman. And that's a very real thing for me. So other things, Black people in the workplace often experience diversity fatigue because we are required to perform the job we were hired to do, but then we're also often put in to be like cultural champions, represent our demographic in conversations, task forces, trainings. There have been times where I've been invited to attend events or lead presentations only because I'm the Black person. Like, of course I'm qualified to do it, but we want to look like we're a diverse employer, or we want to look like this and that. It's like the image and the perception that they want to portray to the community. Like, oh, we're inclusive, we care about diversity, so let's send Whitney. That is not necessarily the case with my current employer, but it has been an issue of the past. I also really want to talk about pay inequity, because this is a very real challenge as well, in a way that I feel like racism is perpetuated in the workplace. So for every $1 that a white man makes, a Black man typically earns 75 cents. A Latino or Latinx man earns 67 cents. A Black woman earns 61 cents. And a Latino or Latinx woman earns 53 cents. So if you've ever worked in a nonprofit or managed any type of budget, then you know that you're able to see every line item. And it's been apparent to me in the past that I have been underpaid compared to my white colleagues. Being Black in the workplace, good is not good enough. You have to be exceptional. When you think about the way you speak, the way you dress, the way you respond to emails, because if you have that one off day, they're going to judge you, they're going to talk about you, they're going to write it down, and they'll probably bring it up later, at a performance review or something like that. It's almost like you can't have an off day. You're expected to be 100% excellent all the time. So just want to bring up some of those factors. There's a bunch of things that you could do in order to help this. One thing is educate yourself. As white people, Black people, everyone needs to educate themselves. But I do want to say that Black people, it is not our job to educate white people on the topic of race or racism. Sharing your experience is one thing, but there are an abundance of resources available. So, podcasts, books, articles, TED Talks, things like that, where if a person really cared, they could do the research on their own. So as Pete said on a webinar through McStaffing about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, he said that discussing race is like reopening a wound. And that's very true. So Black people, we cannot keep traumatizing ourselves for the benefit of others. And then also, George stated that kind of given the context of minorities sharing information, we should be compensated for some of this. So you can't just expect to continue to extract information from us without some type of compensation, especially if it's rewounding ourselves. So educate yourselves, take action, be intentional, and then also hold yourself and others accountable. I'll pause there for questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Whitney. I found myself nodding like every 10 seconds. The code switching is real. The extra hurdles that you have to jump are real. And the comments on hair, which we barely got on last week, are very real too. So I believe that Ayana wants to start with questions that she had.
Have you ever wanted to quit because how they treated you?
Yes. There was a project that I was working on, and I felt like regardless of what I did, my voice was not heard and I was intentionally excluded. And I brought this to the attention of the project leaders, the facilitators, my boss, and we had so many discussions about how are we going to work through this. But yeah, there was definitely a point where I just said, I want to walk away. Like, I have skills, I have education, I have experience. There's people in my inbox every other month trying to recruit me. I don't have to deal with this. So yes, there is a time where I wanted to walk away because of the way I was treated.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being honest in that. And it looks like we have a question from Facebook. It says, Whitney, thank you for sharing. Have you encountered a company that you felt their diversity and inclusion initiatives were performative? In other words, were they only engaging with diversity and inclusion as a way of seeming legitimate instead of actually believing in change?
Yes, I 100% agree with that statement, especially now after the George Floyd murders. A lot of companies, I'm sorry, that was worded poorly, but you guys know what I'm trying to say. After the recent killings, especially by police, there have been a lot of companies who have put out public statements claiming that they stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement or that they value diversity and inclusion. But if you went in to have an like an internal confidential conversation, they are not doing anything to advance the diverse population that they have. They're not necessarily sourcing in diverse neighborhoods. They're not developing the diverse candidates that they have. They're not tracking any type of diversity metrics. So basically, there's nothing in place. They're making these blanket statements to appear like they care, to try to keep the Black dollars coming in probably. But yes, when you look internally, there's nothing in place to support and or develop that minority talent. So yes.
Whitney, last question here, and there are a couple more that came through, but again, we want to make sure we are intentional of time. What would you say, in your opinion, has our justice system failed people of color?
Looking for one specific example?
Sure, yeah.
I feel like this justice system was designed to oppress people of color. When you think about everything that happened in the past, when you think about like the Jim Crow laws, when you think about sentencing guidelines, when you think about the war on drugs and things like that, I feel like the criminal justice system was made to stamp people from the beginning. Because of course, as previous panelists talked about, once you have this criminal record, 1 of 3 people has a criminal record, a majority of those are people of color. But once you have this criminal record, it takes away opportunities. So you're not able to work in certain jobs if you have a felony. You're not able to live in certain neighborhoods, safe housing, sometimes affordable housing, because you have a criminal record. You're not allowed to vote if you have some type of criminal records. So yeah, I feel like it was designed to oppress Black people. So the system is doing what it was designed to do, which is unfair, which is why we need white people to help us overcome some of these challenges.
So a couple other questions came through, and I think we could ask them. One person had, an anonymous attendee said, I really appreciate your comments, Whitney. So true. Code switching is vital to your success in corporate America as a Black woman. However, it can be exhausting. How do you keep balance without losing who you really are?
Working in diversity and inclusion, I feel like I have found my path in the sense that I can now be more authentically me. I can express who I truly am. I also feel like it's the organization that you work for. Yes, code switching is very real, but if you are at an appropriate organization or a company that's a good culture fit for you, you won't have to do it as much. So for an example, with the company that I work for, there was a time where I came in with like bright red hair extensions, and I asked my boss, because I wanted to be respectful, like, is my hair okay? And my boss said, it's your hair, it's your choice. So I said, okay, this is a company I can work for, because there's not going to be like a meeting with HR saying you need to wear natural colored hair, like things like that. So part of it, I think, is just working for the appropriate employer that actually aligns with who you are as a person and what your values are. I don't know if that answered your question, but working for like a good company that aligns with your beliefs and values, I think, is a part of it. But then also, I do a lot of venting. So I may, step away from the office and have a phone call like, you're not going to believe what happened at work today. Am I wrong? Like, am I tripping, or am I right for feeling this way? So I do like voice my frustration with a trusted people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I feel like you spoke from the heart, and then also just such amazing facts, and I think it was very informative for everybody. So thank you, Whitney.
My pleasure.
Ayanna, do you want to introduce our third speaker, Marquise?
Mm-hmm.
Power, platform, and resources to advocate for those who do not have a voice. I also want to remind people that when I say privilege, I'm not just talking about white privilege, because all of us have privilege based off how you are situated in life. Those of us who have college degrees, that's privilege. If you are a part of a certain income class, or income level, that's privilege. If you have a big platform, a large following, whether it's social media, within your job, within your church, whatever, that is privilege as well. And then I also want to encourage those influential people who do have a little bit of power or privilege to really consider mentoring and or sponsoring those people of color in their community who may not have opportunities without your help. Because part of the reason that I got to the place I am is because influential white men advocated for me to have a seat at the table or a job and things like that. So we all have a role to play.
That's awesome, Whitney. To piggyback off what you just said, my husband and I have looked at the businesses and the people that we are supporting and asked them what their stance is on minorities and leaders, and where does their diversity look like in their organization. A lot of people have stayed silent, and a lot of people have said, well, we don't support this. On the other hand, we've seen a lot of organizations that are supporting more diversity in the leadership in roles in their organization. So I would also